welcome to this first webinar on innovation and practice. I'm really excited for everyone to join us together with Marijke Hessel. My name is Linda Toon, and today I will host this webinar of Marijke Hessel's tech dramaturg and researcher. Can you explain a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Marijke Hessels. I'm a tech dramaturg, which means that I'm interested in technology from a dramaturgical point of view, and I believe that technology is a very cultural phenomenon and that we should, especially in the performing arts, look at it from that perspective. And I teach about these topics at the Scenography Bachelors at the AHK and Interactive Performance Design at the HKU. And I write about technology and performing arts for Theaterklad magazine, amongst other things. So I'm very excited to share some of my thoughts today.
Well, I'm excited to hear about it. What I should mention is that I'm an agile coach and Scrum Master in the cultural sector. And together with Thomas Brandt, interdisciplinary and immersive director, we took the initiative for this webinar series. Before we start, we want to thank Platform ACT and Over Impulse, who made it with their funding possible for us to collaborate and create this series of webinars.
Can I suggest that Thomas also says hi for a second?
Yes, please do. Thomas, say hi.
And then you have all three of us.
There you go.
Hi.
So next week, Thomas will take the lead in the webinar. But first, I want to explain to you why we took this initiative. Like many of us probably in the chat, joining us today in the webinar, we see that new ways of working, technology, is becoming more and more indispensable for the cultural and creative sector and also the performing arts scene. So we see that it creates opportunities for creativity, collaboration, and accessibility. At the same time, we see it brings up challenges. So during one of many conversations Marijke, Thomas, and myself had, we realized that we share specific knowledge on these topics, different knowledge from different views, from different angles. And we wanted to make this knowledge more and more accessible to the field, because we believe that innovation is more than a buzzword and that it requires a constant flow of fresh perspectives on workflows, on collaborations, and on ways to integrate it into the artistic process. So this is also the reason why we will do this webinar in English. As you can hear from our accents, we're all Dutch. And I think most of us joining today are Dutch, but the reason we want to do it in English is that we are recording this webinar, and if anyone is interested outside of the Dutch borders, we wanted to make sure that everybody can access it. That will also give me the opportunity to mention that this is an interactive webinar. Marijke will take the lead, and in the end it's possible to ask questions. Feel free to post any questions during the webinar so I can already review them, and also know that if you don't want the question to be recorded or distributed in any way, feel free to give us a quick email afterwards and we'll make sure it will not hit the internet. So before we're going to kick it off with Marijke, I just wanted to mention the next webinars. The webinar after this will be next week with Thomas, talking about creative access and taking us into his journey into this creative access. And he will shine a light on how technology can help us reach new audiences and also collaborate with unexpected co-creators. On the 19th, I will guide you through possibilities in new ways of working and show you how to use them, when to use them, and especially when not to use them. So now it's time for Marijke, who will show us how working with technology can help create new narratives, ways of working, and collaboration, and maybe even new futures.
Here we go. Yes. So to take you into this whole journey of theater and technology, I decided to start off by taking you guys way back to the beginning of Western theater. So Wait. We're going to talk about innovation. And innovation is something that has been married to theater and the performing arts since forever. But innovation, we'll talk about that throughout all of these webinars. Innovation is never the goal. Innovation is always the road. I firmly believe that we should always think towards a certain point, and that could be a narrative, that can be a new way of exploring, that can be a new world that you want to build for your audience. It can be a new audience that you want to reach. And to achieve those goals and to find those goals, that is where we innovate. And we've done that for thousands of years. And an example of that, the first machine in theater, the Deus Ex Machina, maybe that's something you've heard of before, never realized that it was actually a machine. Back in the day when there was only an open air theater where the old Greek theater makers and playwrights would perform their pieces, this is talking like 2,500 years ago. They obviously did not have a roof, they did not have any artificial lighting, but what they did do is build a machine through which they could lower an actor that was the god. This is where the Deus Ex Machina comes from as a term. Deus means God from the machine. We now use it more as a saying when we want to explain that something comes out of nowhere and then dissolves all the problems. But this technological solution is the beginning, I think, where Western theater and technology met. But this has been developing quite a bit. So what we see in 1921 is the first time that the word robot pops up. It doesn't pop up in any scientific papers. No, the word robot actually comes from a theater piece by Karel Čapek, a Czech playwright, where the word robota means something like forced labor. And these humans in kind of like tinfoil suits were the first robots that were ever thought of. So this is where we see a little bit of a changing of technology being only a tool to technology being also part of the concept, part of a theme, and also bringing it to stage. So there's a little bit more agency in the technology when it's in the end of a process. We put it on the stage, and I want to argue that we also see this more and more in research. This is a bit of research that I was a part of, where we took apart a Now robot, which is a little sturdy boy robot. Well, I mean, they don't say it's a boy, but it's very obvious it's a little dude. We pulled it apart to see how it works. And what we noticed while we were doing it is that the technology tries to tell us something too. The way that it wants to be taken apart, the way that it works, the way that it doesn't work, the way that it wants to move, the way that it doesn't want to move. So the way that we researched this was also in a very strong collaboration with what the technology wants. And this looking at the agency of a robot or a technology is something that we have more and more ideas about, and also more and more room for. This is an example of a collaboration from Ulrike Kwade company where I was working, where we worked with these big KUKA arms, and the KUKA arms were designed, big industrial robot arms, to go from point A to B in the most how do you say this, most efficient way. And that's where it became really interesting when we wanted it to make more of a dramatic movement in the arm. We had 2 KUKA robot arms and a puppet of 2.5 meters attached to it. And when we would want the puppet to make a dramatic movement with the arm, we would need to incorporate other points between A and B in order to make it want to move that way, because it decided for itself, the way that it was programmed, of course, what its favorite or preferred way of moving was. And these things where we find like an agency in the technology that we work with, we also learn about ourselves and the way that we have creative processes. An example where we see these technological collaborators work with human collaborators, and it brings us a lot in terms of what it means to work together. Is, for example, The Performance End by Chris Verdonk, where human performance and non-human performance together make up a choreography. And a very famous saying from this process is, "Listen to the bloody machine," is actually became the title of a book about these species process that was mandatory for this piece, where a dancer needed to listen to what the machine wanted on stage within the process. So we see this development, and I'm pretty sure that all of you are here because you're also knee-deep into this development yourselves. And how I see it is that technology can take a place in the performing arts in these 3 ways. And argue with me, please, about these 3. But this is where I think we can start from to dissect how do we incorporate technology in the performing arts. So on the top, you see these back office aid and business support ways. This is, I think, where I have a little less with. I can tell you less about. That's something definitely where Linda will come in and talk about. How do we work with technology to make our back office more efficient? What kind of technologies do we use there? How do we incorporate technology when we are writing grant funds? Well, I mean, they're very important questions, but what I focus on more is the bottom 2 points. The right one is the collaborator on stage, where technology is part of the content. That's what I showed you previously, the work by Chris Verdonk, for example. But we see it also as when we see an AI that writes a script, for example, something that Oerland did quite recently, where the AI is part of the actual artwork. And then as a third point, I try to dissect those, is where technology can be an accelerator or an aid for prototyping, or at least play a very big role in the creative process. In order to have it be a collaborator on stage, of course, it needs to take place in the process. So it already takes on the role of a prototyping aid or an accelerator or a collaborator in the process. But I'd argue that there's even more possibilities and more to dissect those too. But we're going to talk mostly about these bottom 2 parts and roles of technology in the performing arts. Why do we want to do this? Why take on this whole endeavor in the first place? If we look at those examples where technology is a part of the work, we can also look at the technology as just a tool, as just another lamp in the theater. But I believe we get further when we understand technology as something with dramaturgical properties. Technology is a really cultural phenomenon. It doesn't, blow over us as a storm. It's really something that we make and we move towards a certain direction. So in every shape and form, they trigger an association or a reference. And when working with tech on stage, we add to a really big archive of stories on our past and our present and our future with technologies. And these can have really real and tangible consequences. So, for example, we have a lot of inventions that we already have to thank from sci-fi, from science fiction or speculative design, or how highbrow or lowbrow you want to name it. And a big example is KITT from David Hasselhoff. His Knight Rider car was actually the first self-driving car. We could argue that the self-driving vehicle goes way more back. But KITT, I think, is a good example of how we still envision a driving and smart car. The smart watch came straight out of Star Trek. So these narratives, they don't only follow technology or the hive mind about technology, but they also are a driving force behind innovation in the actual real world. So it matters what stories we tell. And another reason that we should look into what technology can do and also what it cannot do is because it's so inherently human, as I said before. So Shirley, the lady that we see over here, the Kodak Shirley card, that's a picture of an employee by Kodak who was used from the 50s on as a picture to calibrate every developing machine that would develop pictures when you would bring your little picture roll. And this surely was just used over every machine in the States, which means that they were all calibrated on this specific girl with her white and fair skin. And it wasn't until the 60s and 60s that the first mothers of color found out that their class pictures made their children turn up as black blobs with no definition. So it actually took another decade before Kodak decided to change these pictures. And I tell this to illustrate that the biases that we have as humans has always found its way into technologies. That's not something that we can separate. And that's something that we can also still keep on telling stories about and be aware of, because we keep on falling into this narrative again that somehow technology could achieve something more neutral, more objective than we can. So there's a lot of power in speculation, and this speculation can go into different directions. To be really blunt, we have this kind of a spectrum where it goes from utopian to dystopian. So we could say when we make works about technology, we can go full tech solutionism. Technology will be the answer for everything, just wait. And the dystopian, which is more often a source for the arts and for movies, is when we keep walking down this road, we're going to head into some trouble. This dystopian and utopian images or lenses, that's something that Professor Dan Hassler-Forrest, media scholar from University of Utrecht, reflects on by saying that something is only a utopia or a dystopia when we take into account what the power relations are in the story. And an example for that is 2012. That's the disaster movie about the end of the world, which is very obviously a dystopian movie for humans. It's very utopian for birds. It would be amazing to just have it cleaned out. There's a lot of water. Land will pop up again. There's no more cities. So it's only from one point of view you look at something, whether it's a dystopian or utopian worldview. Another example, the Minority Report, the other picture that I selected for this, is kind of a dystopian futuristic film where predictive policing takes a place. Way before predictive policing was something that we spoke about in terms of AI. For those who are a little bit who don't know what I'm talking about, predictive policing is the idea that through AI, through pattern recognition, police would at a certain point be able to predict where criminal acts will take place. Well, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the film Minority Report actually gives us a speculative future where we see this happen, which makes a lot of philosophical questions arise about if we haven't committed a crime yet, can we even say that someone would be able to do that? So they invoke a lot of questions about free will. And I've sat at a table with people from Amnesty and people from a police department who were discussing what possible futures for the police department would look like. And the actual police officers said they wanted to have a future like Minority Report, which to me is really interesting because it's a very dystopian film that shows us that that is actually not the future that we want. And still, it's a very strong story about what it could bring when we when we tell these stories about technology and when it opens up possibilities in our mind. If we can think it, why can't we make it? That's how it develops. And why don't we leave it to the CEO bros? Well, I'll show you a little bit from Eric Schmidt, who is a former Google CEO. He was a guest on an AI plus energy summit last November. Let's see if this
is infinite, even assuming everything that you're implying in your question. So let's go through that. First, we already discussed better materials for batteries. That takes a while, but that's important. You move to DC power lines for better transmission, loss control, things like that. You build those things. That takes a while. In terms of delivery of power, you work on power line losses. You put the data centers next to the big power lines, as I described earlier. And architecturally, there are huge improvements to be made in essentially cost effectiveness per transaction. All of that will be swamped by the enormous needs of this new technology. And because it's a universal technology, and because it's the arrival of an alien intelligence, right, something we don't understand, we may make mistakes with respect to how it's used, but I can assure you that we're not going to get there through conservation. That's the key point. And the economics will drive it anyway. No large company wants to have a huge power bill. Most of the people that I've talked with say power bill is becoming a very large component of their expenses.
Do you think we can meet AI's energy needs without totally blowing out climate goals?
It depends on, well, so the first place is there are plenty, the US uses less power now than we did and generates less CO2 than we did of the bad kind over the last 5 or 10 years. So the industry and the regulatory structures are working to reduce on a percentage basis and so forth. So it's really kind of a race between improvements in, for example, gasoline emissions, electric cars, all the things that you all know again, that is getting much better, good job, and then this over thing. My own opinion is that we're not going to hit the climate goals anyway, because we're not organized to do it. We're not, and the way to do it is with the things that we're talking about now. And yes, the needs in this area will be a problem, but I'd rather bet on AI solving the problem than constraining it and having the problem, if you see my point.
We're out of time, but top 3 action steps that need to be taken now, in your opinion.
Done? Yes, done. Quite dystopian, I think, because this is one of the most influential people and a very big CEO, ex-CEO, that is very blunt about that he believes that we don't have the means to hit the climate goals, and he would rather bet on AI. So if we leave it to these quite dystopian yet tech solutionist views, we don't have a lot of space for fantasies in different directions. And that's, I think, something that we need a lot in the coming years and decades. So combining working with technology with thinking about technology, how do we do this? Tech dramaturgy can be a bridge. Dramaturgy means the working of the play, comes from the Greek words drama and urgos, which together mean the working or action of a play. And when we expand what dramaturgy can mean outside of just the classical theater, it's a way to curate the different elements in your work, and that's how a dramaturgical view can also come into aid when you work in VR, when you make installations, because when with a dramaturgical perspective, you can start looking at the work as a whole, a theatrical apparatus. So that's what we call it, where we take into account every material and non-material aspect that makes meaning in the work that you create. A very important element of that, for example, is onboarding and offboarding. This is something that within classical theater we have rules about. Our onboarding is quite the same. We show our tickets, we sit down, we shut up when the lights go off, and we sit there until the end. So we have quite a set of rules. When we work with new ways of making art, innovative ways of making art, especially when we incorporate new technologies, that's when we have to start thinking, where does it begin? Where does it end? Like, what is the onboarding? What do I need to step into this experience? And what do I need to also leave it in the most dramaturgical way possible, so that every step, including the way that I step into it and the way that I leave it, all aids to what it is that you want to tell me or that you want me to experience. And all of this, I think, comes from thinking of technology as a dramaturgical tool with dramaturgical properties. And tech dramaturgy, I think, can be the voice that translates between this technology as a form and technology as a part of the content and part of your story and of the world. And the first process to get closer to that is that we need to be more honest about our processes. So what we always say that our processes look like is this. We presented, we started at A and we ended at B, and what it actually looks like is usually this. And it doesn't really matter that we don't show all of the side steps in every bit of the work, I think, but what we do need to be a little bit more honest about is that we take into in our process a lot of new knowledge when it comes to working with technologies, and we kind of don't board them. We don't keep them. We don't keep them. Yeah, we don't archive them as secure or as precise as possible, which is why a lot of times we keep inventing the wheel over and over. So there's, oh, I think I'm back. You're back. You're back. Oh, there's one camera. So this is the being more honest about how these processes work, also amongst each other, amongst professionals, I think is the first step to get further with our innovative processes. And we can take a lot of lessons also from other disciplines when we try to look at these processes, take them apart, and look at how we can learn more from them, so that we don't only learn from them at the end, but we learn from them halfway through as well. And what we don't use for this specific work, we put it somewhere else and we know where it is, so we can use it again for our next process. There's a lot of design and tech sector tools that we can use for this. I want to show you a couple that we've also been working with a lot when we work with robotics at the Ulrike Quade company. We used to do that when I worked with Setup. There was also a lot of prototyping. This is something that in design is more known. I'm just going to shift a little bit so that I can see where I put my cursor. Yeah. And an example of a good way of prototyping is Wizard of Ozing. Wizard of Ozing is acting as if something is robotic or technological, while there is a human.
Oh, dat is dichtbij,
behind.
ja.
So you can see in this
Kun je dan zo
video,
uitleggen? Zo?
this was a first version of a 3-part robot to
Oh, ja.
head.
Dit moet natuurlijk.
Fired up by a doorknob robot, small industrial robot. Before we would start programming it, deciding what we wanted to do, have a programmer start from scratch, have that person program it for 20 minutes I was thinking about how long it's going. Program it for months, then come back and then decide if it is the right or wrong choreography. Wizard of Ozing gives us the opportunity to see immediately what something gives and what it does. Houtje touwtje, I added it, it's a Dutch word. And that's what you see in the left part, where Casper de Jong, my colleague at Setup, wanted to build a robot that can make pottery together with a human friend or collaborator. Sounds too big. We wanted to build a friendly action, a friendly exploration of pottery, kind of inspired by the Ghost scene. Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, where the ghost of Demi Moore sits behind Patrick Swayze and helps them do pottery. And in order to get close to what an experience can be, building it with cardboard and building it with pens, building it with little cups can all aid you in feeling very materially, in a very material sense, what the dramaturgical properties are of what you're working with. And what the technology could mean. Because as we know, working with technology is really expensive and it takes a lot of time. So the way that we used to work in performing arts, where we think of an idea and we have this conceptual phase for a very long time and only quite a short period where we work on the floor, that one, everyone that's tried to work with new technologies or digital technologies has found out that that is not the way to work. So we need to incorporate ways in which we can also fail. And we can get some inspiration for that from the gaming industry. I incorporated a picture of Cyberpunk. This was a game that was supposed to be launched, I think, 2018 or 2019. It was postponed. Finally, it was launched in 2021. And as with a lot of games, when it was launched, it had a lot of bugs. It didn't work properly. People were disappointed up to a certain point, but most people were very willing to share the bugs, because that is where there is possibilities and interfaces designed to let the designers know, this is where I find a bug, this is where it doesn't work, this is where I glitch. And what happens is that after this release date, we get patch on patch on patch. And a year later, the game works perfectly. Which means that there is also a sense of a hive mind thinking together towards a better working, better suited, but also stronger work of art. And I think we can learn from that, where we don't see the premiere as an endpoint of a creative process, but see it more as a release, a starting point. And that also means that we have to think about involving that audience in a different way. They can maybe think with you towards an end or a presentation date, but there's also ways, and I think Oorlan does a really good job at that by designing Oorlan Doet. These are small places, small moments in time, twice a year, where interested audience can come together and see works in progress. And being more honest about our works in progress, but also being honest about what this audience gives back to us, will help us in our field develop more towards a tinkering and patching practice. So it can also aid to connect different audiences to your work and have your audience have a different relationship to your work. But that means that you have to be more open towards these new perspectives on your work. And it also means sharing the credit. And that is something where it becomes quite difficult in our funding system where we are now. One of the biggest things that we should change when we do want to have these longer research periods, when we do want to have these other ways of looking at the process, where we want to share more of our dramaturgical responsibilities with other collaborators, we need to be able to share the credits. And that's where it becomes interesting, because we still have both a funding system that relies heavily on one bigger party that is the pen footer. You could translate that for me. Project manager. Yeah. But we also see it in the press. We want to have one person or one artistic leader, one artistic brain, which is quite hierarchical, where we can put the majority of the responsibility for the work. So we have to rethink the ways in which we share that responsibility, invite our technological collaborators as dramaturgical thinkers from the beginning of our process. And one of the other important ways that we can change the way that we work is also by mixing up our research periods and our rehearsal periods. I think I also put in a little image for why it is so important. AI will be able to build a lot of interactions in new ways, but in order to not oversell or overestimate what it can do, I think this image is very clear about how important it is that we make theater and make performing arts with these tools, so that we can find out how incredibly stupid. It can also be. I reflected on it before that this tech dramaturgical role can be a role of a translator, and this is something that I've seen happen very in the field. And one of my favorite art pieces. Nee, gewoon moment.
Moments.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments where this occurred was in a dialogue between an artist and a researcher from the UvA, where they were discussing what the next step would be in their collaboration. So we had this researcher from a lectorate who works with social AI, and we have a theater maker that talks in the language of the performing arts. They said, we'll get together again in 2 weeks, and then we'll have you guys work on a robot that does this and this, and we will bring that and that to the table. And then the theater maker said, yes, good. And then we'll see if it works. And then the professor said, but of course it will work. No worries. It will work. No, but we have to see if it works. So we had this whole dialogue exchange where it was very obvious that they both understood something very different from does it actually work? So I talked about that one of the ways in which we can tinker that creative process is to plan these longer rehearsals, plan breathing room. We all know about how we get errors along the way. We find out that there's other platforms or other software sources that we need to explore. And building and breathing room in your processes, I cannot stress enough that that is super important to have. Another thing that can help tinker those creative processes is alternating rehearsals and research. Having your research only at the beginning is something that maybe sounds natural when we come from a design perspective, thinking about maybe a double or triple diamond idea. We only do research in the beginning, and then what we found we implement. But when we get to a field like the performing arts, we see that it's way more of a dialogue between what we find in the research and what the dramaturgical properties are of what we found in the research. So alternating rehearsals and research can help with incorporating the technology and the technological finds from a dramaturgical perspective. Another important thing is understanding your audience, the way that your audience steps into your work and what they understand and what their technological literacy is, changes a lot to how you would, for example, design the onboarding and offboarding. Technological literacy, I mean with that the idea that you already understand a lot about how a certain technology works or what kind of references I have as an audience. So the references that someone who wears VR glasses on a daily basis can be completely different from someone who is 55 and has never put on VR glasses. This onboarding process and the understanding of what your audience references and understands from a certain technology can help with building a full dramaturgical arch that incorporates all of these different audiences that you want to reach. It's also okay to not reach everyone, but then specify them beforehand. Don't mix up your eyes. Interactivity is not the same thing as immersivity. I can do a whole other lecture about the separation of these two. But for now, to be immersed is to submerge, to really dive under. And that is something that can be a very clear goal to innovate towards. Immersivity is something that within the performing arts we have been looking for a very long time. That's why we turn the lights off. That's why we have surround sound. We all want to immerse into a different world. Interactivity is where there is a search for an active role from a spectator. So there is a sense of agency that you give away. These two don't have to be separate. Interactivity can lay over immersivity, but they are not necessarily the same. And it can be very helpful to become really clear in what the separation is in your goal. If you want to innovate towards more immersivity, if you want to innovate towards interactivity, and where these two find each other. The weak and strong interactivity, I won't dive into that. It's we can do a whole other lecture about interactivity. I'm very interested in that topic. And also Eleanor Fuchs, who is an amazing dramaturg and spoke about dramaturgy as a lens where you look at your work as a little planet. These are all ways in which we can be more precise about where we want to innovate towards. And I cannot stress enough that I think that that is the core towards a fruitful innovation. And to help you with that, hire a tech dramaturg to build those bridges, to think about these aims and these goals and how you are going to get to these end goals or this point on the horizon to which you want to innovate. It's always great to have a sparring partner in this sense. And with that, I'm going to round it off. I could talk another couple of hours, but we're gonna keep it at this lunch lecture. I hope you had your sandwich while I was talking about all these different things, and I'm very curious to hear if you have any questions or remarks.